Hey, I'm Srini, host and founder of the Unmistakable Creative Podcast and the creator of Maximize Your Output with Mem. In the previous two videos in our series on workflow optimization, we talked about how to document the process for all the tasks that you complete on a regular basis, and we talked about how to streamline your workflow for each of these tasks by using AI. And in this video, what I'm going to show you how to do is to take all of that and put it together so you can design a system for workflow optimization. And if you haven't checked it out, be sure to check out our free guide to building a second brain in Mem. I'll include a link in the description below. Now, let's get to the tutorial. So in the previous two videos, the thing we talked about was how to first document the process for completing all of your tasks. And in the second video, we talked about how to streamline your workflow by using AI to do it. And what we're going to do in this third video is talk about how to put all of that together to create a system for workflow optimization. As I mentioned in the previous videos, every single task that you complete has a workflow, but often the output that we're trying to get to actually requires several tasks and several workflows. And a system really is nothing more than a combination of the various workflows. And if you remember, the thing we talked about in the previous videos was that for every task you complete in every workflow, there are four sort of pillars of workflow design, which are people, processes, information, and tools. And so what I'm going to show you in this video is how to connect all of that together to create a system for doing this. So for example, what you're looking at here is a workflow diagram of all the tasks involved in publishing an episode of the Unmistakable Creative Podcast. And prior to building this system, this process used to take me anywhere between 5 to 10 hours a week. Now all this takes maybe 10 to 5 minutes a week. Now all this takes maybe 5 to 10 minutes a week, if that. So let me first walk you through the process of creating a workflow diagram of all your tasks and how they work together. And then I'll explain how it all works in our system. So when we publish an episode of the Unmistakable Creative, the first thing that happens is the guest pitch. And there are two types of guest pitches. The first is an inbound pitch, which we receive on our contact form. And the other is an outbound pitch in which I actually reach out to potential podcast guests. And so when we receive an inbound pitch, we either say yes or we say no. And if we say yes, then we send them a Calendly link with an invite to book their interview. And once they book the interview, then a record gets added to Airtable, and then we record the interview. Once that's done, what we do is we mark the interview as recorded in Airtable. And then there are three sort of sub-steps to that. The first is to export the audio and then transcribe it into script. Then we export it to a markdown file in Dropbox, and then Zapier creates a mem of that transcript. So I always have access to all my podcast transcripts inside of Mem. The other thing we have to do is create cover art. So after I mark the interview as recorded, I upload a headshot and then submit a design request. Our designer then uploads a podcast cover for each episode. And then we go into the publishing step, which is where our audio engineer edits it. And then when we add a publish URL to Airtable and mark the interview as published, then Zapier triggers an email notification to notify the guest. Now, one thing that helps in this process, you'll notice that I specifically chose red, yellow, and green. And the reason for that is it helps to think of this as going through traffic lights. So green being go, which basically is the completion of the task, yellow being somewhere in between, and red being stop and not going through with the task. So you can think of them as stoplights in a lot of ways. Let me show you how this looks in Airtable behind the scenes. So as you can see here, once we have somebody scheduled, they get added to Airtable with their interview date. If we have somebody who pitches us as a guest, they have a guest pitch here, and then we either mark this as interested. And if we mark it as interested, then it automatically sends them an invite with a Calendly link so they can book their interview. Once that's done, we end up going to another part of the process, which is right here in this table. And you can see here, we mark the interviews as recorded. I add a title. And then from there, I upload a headshot. And you can see here, our designer then goes ahead and uploads cover art for each guest based on whatever the air date is. And finally, the other thing we do is we transcribe all of this so that it goes into Descript automatically. And then in this publish view, what you'll see here is they have the cover art as well as a link to their interview. And once that publish URL is there and we mark it as published, it automatically triggers a notification to the guest via Zapier. So individually, all of these steps seem really complicated and they can be really messy. It seems like all of this is very difficult, but if you break this down into multiple steps and take it one step at a time, you'll be amazed at what you can accomplish in terms of increasing your efficiency. But as we talked about in the previous two videos, documenting your process in detail is really critical because of the fact that tools like Zapier work on if-then instructions. And if you don't have clear, concise documentation, it's going to be very hard for you to actually automate this entire process. And as you can see here, okay, just delete that part there. So once you've created this mind map of the workflow for a system, for whatever it is that you're doing, then one of the optional steps that you can take is you can actually use a tool like ChatGPT to ask what Zapier automations you should build in order to complete this workflow system. That's optional. If you actually know what you want to do, that's when you can actually just go in and start building the various Zapier automations. So let me just show you what a standard Zapier automation looks like. So you can see here that this is a Zapier automation that basically tells Zapier that anytime there's a new file in a Dropbox folder that is titled UC transcripts, then go ahead and create a mem from the transcript and import that note into mem. Basically, what you want to do is anytime you have a task where the content changes, but the process doesn't, you have a task that can be very easily automated. So for example, in the case of a podcast, I know that the content is going to change, but the process for booking a guest, for publishing an episode, for creating cover art, all of that stays the same. So you can see here that we've built a series of different zaps. So there's one that basically sends a zap to the first zap is when we receive an inbound pitch and we say yes, we then send an email inviting the guest to book an interview, and that happens using Gmail. And then when the guest schedules the interview with Calendly, we add the record to Airtable, as I showed you. And then, as I just showed you, if there's a file in the folder you see transcripts, then it imports the transcript to mem. And then if we mark the interview as published in Airtable and the field published URL is not empty in Airtable, we notify the guest that their interview is live. So you can see here the combination of people, process, tools, and information that we talked about in the previous two videos, all working together. And then the final step of this is to repeat this for all the tasks that you complete on a regular basis. And in a lot of cases, you can actually reuse the same zap. So this zap basically that you're seeing here is one that basically captures podcast transcripts based on whether there's a file in this folder. But I also use the exact same zap to capture transcripts of my video tutorials inside of Mem. And the only difference is that we just change the information. So we just change this from UC transcripts to maximize your output video transcripts. Like I said at the beginning, this all might seem a little bit complicated in terms of making it all work together. But if you take it one task at a time, and then really think about how all the tasks fit together to produce whatever output it is you're trying to produce, whether it's publishing a blog post, whether it's publishing a podcast, or generating client documentation, whatever it is, what you'll see is that if you can start to chain different workflows for different tasks together and create a system, you'll see a dramatic increase in your efficiency. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, this process of managing the workflow for a podcast used to take me upwards of an hour a week because I would have to do it all manually. And now that it's all automated, I spend maybe 5 to 10 minutes a week managing all of this. And as always, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below.